I was asked by a church in Texas to do a 3-minute testimony about my experience in the Jesus movement in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I thought, well, let's just go ahead and let that be our Hendo at home as well this week. I accepted Christ in 1969, was a part of the Jesus movement. One of the things that refreshed my heart was the fact that I met among the Christians in the Jesus movement a joy that I hadn't seen in church. To be honest with you, when I went to church, it was boring. I looked around and I thought everybody drank prune juice before they got there. They had such sour looks. And then I met these crazy Christians outside the church that loved life. One of the verses they constantly quoted was John 10:10, I've come that they might have life and might have it abundantly. And I wanted what they had, and that drew me to Christ. So the first characteristic that I was impressed with about the Jesus movement was joy. The fact that you can have fun being a Christian. I didn't realize that. A second characteristic of the Jesus movement that meant something to me and meant something to this church was the fact that it birthed a whole new kind of music. It was the first time guitars came into the church. I've got beside me here, and you'll see a close-up in just a moment, of a picture that's out in our hallway, in our hall of pictures, of the Sound of Singing Youth back in the 1970s. Aubrey Edwards led this. Ian Walker was the pastor. And we had hundreds of young people that flooded into First Baptist because this new music was their way of expressing their love for Jesus. And you can see drums being held up, guitars being held up, tambourines being held up. And right here is Steve Briggs holding up his guitar when he was a high school student here. And so God just birthed this whole new thing of contemporary Christian music. In 1970, I formed a Jesus band, and we went around and we'd persecute the saints, singing songs that we'd written ourselves or perhaps changing a few words in a Beatles song. So joy was a characteristic of the Jesus movement. Guitars and contemporary music was a characteristic of the Jesus movement. But a third characteristic of those days was boldness. We just looked for opportunities, sometimes without using common sense. We looked for opportunities to lift up Jesus, to share the gospel. I'll give one story from my life. When I was invited by one of the girls that I knew to be her date for her sorority dance. She knew she should only invite a Christian, so I went and agreed on that basis. I was in that gym when the band was playing, 400 people. The lostness in the gym just so burdened my heart that when the band took a break, I jumped up on the platform, turned the microphone back on. I stood up, raised my fist in the air and yelled, "Revolution," because that's what you did in that day and time. You yelled revolution. And then I said, Jesus has done a revolution in my life. Jesus can do a revolution in your life. And I shared the gospel right there in that armory. And then after sharing it, I said, would you like to have Christ come into your life? 4 different people raised their hands to accept Christ that day in that gym. So think about the freshness of that day and time. There was a fresh joy. There was a fresh set of music, and guitars came into the church. But there was also that fresh boldness that I pray we would recover in our day and time. I'm grateful that I can give you the testimony of having witnessed one of the great awakenings that came to America, the Jesus movement.